Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our Victoria 3 tutorial series, and we're going to be talking about evaluating PM efficiency. And in this video it's going to be relatively advanced. We're going to spend a lot of time in the spreadsheet, and so this might not be the best video if you are looking for some more beginner content or something that is kind of just giving you hard and fast rules. But if you want to develop a deeper understanding of the game and kind of some underlying things in the game that inform decisions in a way that's maybe not the most transparent, then this video might be for you. In this video, we will be discussing, first of all the different categories we have in our spreadsheet and why I think these are important things to note in regards to any sort of PM. We will also be discussing, the different categories of goods we have. We have resource industries these are the rural areas that are, producing mines and stuff like this. We have agriculture, which is the plantations and all the farms. We have industrial goods, and this is kind of the third category. There's two different types of industrial goods: consumer and industrial, or manufactured goods rather. There's industrial goods and consumer goods as far as the manufacturers go, but these all kind of have similar characteristics and this sort of thing. After this, we'll be using two examples to kind of highlight some ideas, and that's going to be the logging camps, or as we like to say, the chop chops, and the chemical plants, which I think highlight some ideas for understanding in a more nuanced way some of what we were going to be talking about. And then we're also going to be talking about which PMs are the absolute most efficient, just briefly covering them. And then we're also going to be talking about what is some strategy. If you know which PMs are the most efficient, what should your strategy be in regard to this? Okay, so jumping in, we're going to talk about the chop chops, and we're going to be talking about all these sorts of stats here. So first of all, we have the input. Now, the input value is derived from getting the price of all of the goods that are put into the input and multiplying it by their base price. In the case of simple forestry, there are no inputs. But once we get onto sawmills, we will be using 5 tools per chop chop, and these tools have a base price of 40, so the input cost is 200. The output cost is what is output multiplied by its base price. And so for here we have wood, 60 times 20, it's 1200, right? Okay, the number that's kind of important to derive from these two is the net value. The net value is the output minus the input. Simple. And this is going to be positive on nearly everything except for 2 PMs, or 3 if you include the fact that potatoes and apple orchards are interchangeably efficient. Now, it's the only 2 goods of one of these is hardwood production. And so I think that we should perhaps jump into this immediately and talk about this, because this is going to be the elephant in the room. We're examining efficiency using base prices. But base prices aren't what you see in the game, and the mechanics do not allow for base prices to be always at 0. In fact, the game will encourage it away from 0, and so first of all, you don't want to just try and make everything base price 0, but also it's going to be helpful for evaluating PMs, because hardwood is almost always, with the exception of the very early game, you always want to be on hardwood production. So let's take a quick look in game and talk about the chop chops. So hardwood production, what it does is you get minus 20 softwood and plus 20 hardwood. Base price of softwood is 20, base price of hardwood is 40. And so what this will do is it will have no net output on base prices. However, if you notice over here, the softwood, its actual price in the market is about 20, which is pretty close to the base price. The actual price of hardwood in the market is substantially above 40. And so because of this PM is going to be efficient. And so whenever you are evaluating a PM, in the case of the logging camps, let's jump back into our spreadsheet here. Let's jump back in here and jump back into here. Whenever you're evaluating a PM, you have to keep in mind that this net would dramatically change if the good that's getting output has a different price. And so the efficiency, this is the efficiency in the abstract we're looking at with this spreadsheet, which is important. But to kind of understand it, you have to realize that if, for example, softwood, in the case of looking at electric sawmills, if softwood was plus 50%, we would need to input 3,000 instead in order to look at it, which is going to greatly affect, you saw all these numbers shift over, and we're going to talk about these numbers in a second, but it's going to make a really big difference in terms of how things actually shake out And so let's just fix our spreadsheet here. But just keeping in mind that this is an abstraction of evaluation that allows us to evaluate everything based on base prices, and things will not trend towards the base price. And we're going to talk about why a little bit later. To some extent, they will never trend towards the base price. Okay, so coming on over, efficiency is just the idea of output over input. Generally speaking, really high efficiency buildings will tend to depress the price of a good, because what they do is they have a ton of output per input, and so they have a ton of net value, but this will be such that good prices become quite cheap, which is what you notice specifically with agricultural goods a lot. However, there is a kind of problem with all the resource industries, which is that they are scarce. And so these prices generally do not get depressed despite being high efficiency in the resources. Next up, we have construction, which is really important and something that cannot be left out of any sort of valuation. Buildings take different amount of times to construct. And so a lot of buildings will have a base construction time of 8 weeks. A lot of the resource ones, specifically the mines, will have a base construction price of 16 weeks. Agriculture is 8 weeks, and all the industrial goods are 24 weeks. And this is important to recognize because you'll see that their output and their net of all these industrial buildings is absolutely massive, but you can't evaluate just based off of, the nominal thing. What's important is relative to construction, what is this building doing? And that's what this tab is. This is net for our cell construction efficiency, which should actually just be like net construction efficiency, to be honest. For our net construction efficiency, this is this value divided by construction. And so you'll notice, if we look through here, this is kind of what we got going on. And so despite, let's see here, this has a net value of 900. It's going to be considerably less efficient than this that has a net value of 1,000 because it takes twice as long to construct a mine, right? But this isn't kind of the be-all, end-all. This is an important thing to look at, but actually throughout most of the early and the middle game, you really care about investment pool transfer. It's an enormous percentage of your ability to construct new buildings. And so I think we'll just kind of come back into Victoria 3 for a second, and because we don't want to spread a spreadsheet. We don't want to sweat a spreadsheet for forever, and we'll take a look at investment pool transfer here. This is going to be an enormous percentage of your income for a really long time. And so what you actually really care about is not how much goods are being provided to the market, although you care about this. The buy orders is not necessarily what you really care about, although larger buy orders will increase taxes. So if it's close, you're still going to value the buy orders and sell orders because it's going to having a lot of sell orders is going to increase your GDP. Your GDP directly contributes, to your tariffs. Or sorry, not your tariffs, to your minting. It's going to be based on GDP and gold mines. And so this is just kind of important to keep in mind when you are evaluating something, when you're talking about the net value versus how valuable it is to the investment pool transfer. And it's like, okay, well, why would this number be different? Different ownership for different buildings is going to inform which ones contribute more to the investment pool. If we take a look here, we have ownership over here, and we have a few values that we're using here. We are using value for the resources industry and the industrial industries. We are using values for being on interventionalism here, and then we are using values for being on laissez-faire with a happy industrialist. And so you'll notice we should actually put this over here. But, oop. Oh my god. Please don't ruin my video. I'm just trying to rearrange something. Okay. So, for here, it's 20% contribution from the capitalists. And so you'll notice the same building is going to score 25 in terms of how much it's contributing to the investment pool per construction. This number is this number, the net construction efficiency, multiplied by this number here. Okay? If we are on laissez-faire and also have happy industrialists that are powerful, two things will happen. Let's jump back in the game and briefly come over and look at the thing. If we have a happy industrialist first, right here, and they are over 20% clout, you'll notice they have the job creators, which contributes 20% more investment pool contribution efficiency. If we come in here and we look at laissez-faire and the laws, we'll see that this increases 25% investment pool contribution efficiency. So we'll be receiving plus 45% contribution efficiency. The base contribution of capitalists is 20%. And so an additional, 45% will bring you up to 29, which is why we have the 0.29 here. So you'll notice the difference between interventionalism and laissez-faire happy capitalist. It's quite large in terms of increasing your investment pool contribution, which in the early to mid game is extremely powerful. It will eventually fall off. We could jump back into the game and talk about why. It's going to fall off later on in the game because you will have a malus that applies as your economy gets larger. You will have all investments modified by a larger and larger number as your GDP grows. And so this number will become less important as time goes on. As time goes on, you will care more about the net and less about the net as it is modified by, investment pool contribution efficiency. This will also, it's important to kind of just, if we take a quick look at agriculture, generally agriculture has huge net values and huge efficiency values. They just have enormous outputs, especially with the later PMs. And so agriculture is, though, notably not as good as a lot of the other stuff, because when you are multiplying by the fact that they have, poorer investment pool contribution, they don't provide as much to the investment pool per construction, even though they only take 8 to construct as well. And so we'll jump back into the resource tab to continue talking about this. We have by demand efficiency, which is simply the inputs multiplied by construction, or modified by construction, the inputs divided by construction rather. And this is just how much it's stimulating other stuff in your economy. It's not that important to statistic, but I think it's worth looking at. And finally, we have the output construction efficiency, which is these two values added together. You'll also notice that in some things like nitroglycerin and dynamite, this value is huge relative to what nitroglycerin does. That's because we are, if you notice here, we're adding it to this value. So whenever there's a primary PM and a secondary PM, as far as explaining our spreadsheet goes, the secondary PM will be added to the primary PM when evaluating the net construction efficiency. That way all these other values look nice and this sort of thing. Okay. And same here, we have the same idea where it's being modified. So the overall output is going to be, what the total thing is. So if we had something that cost 5,000 output and 5,000 input, the output construction efficiency would be 10,000 and the net construction efficiency would be 0, let's say. Okay, so let's just briefly kind of talk about all the industries and talk about which ones are best in this type of stuff. Generally speaking, the resource industries, which are coal mines, gold mines. Gold mines we're actually not going to really talk about because they're an anomaly, and this is probably not the best way to evaluate gold. But oil, rubber, fishing, all the mines, the chops, these sorts of industries, these will generally be quite efficient. They will generally contribute quite a lot to the construction efficiency. And because they have a lot of efficiency, you need to somehow create demand. You can create demand through two ways. You can either build manufacturing, or you can export. Okay. But these will contribute quite a lot to the investment pool as a general heuristic. For agriculture, they don't contribute a lot to the investment pool, although you'll notice some of these numbers are quite large. This is after you get on publicly traded. I guess we'll just need to talk about moving from this to this. This is with happy capitalists, but this is the fact that we have over here, the ownership, we only have 0.1 instead of 0.29 because these are owned by aristocrats, which only contribute 10% of their income to the investment pool. We haven't evaluated it under agrarianism because agrarianism sucks. And so we're just coming in here. And the secondary one, the better one we have is when you swap to publicly traded, overall 16-ish%, 16.33 repeating, will get contributed to the investment pool. And so you'll notice kind of a big inflection point of change when you jump over from this to this. So despite the fact that they are creating like a large net value per instance of building or per construction, they are still not contributing a lot to the investment pool, and so this is why you generally don't want these as much. Also, if you are firing people from subsistence farms, and this is an important consideration, you are going to be, this value is also going to be applied. This negative net value of deleting the subsistence farm, especially the rice one, which is nearly double the output. I think that the AI doesn't capture this, which is one of the reasons why, if we jump back into the game and we just take a quick look in China, I'm assuming there will be a ton of unemployed pops. Because when they build farms, they nuke, fully employed here. And so whenever they build a farm here, although they don't have a lot, they will fire the pops. And so in general, what will happen in China is you'll have huge amounts of unemployed, and they will, this is really struggling after the 1.2 nerfs. But okay. While we're in the game, why don't we talk about a second thing about agriculture. So agriculture, all the outputs are extremely efficient. But unfortunately, a lot of their outputs are not actually goods that are used for any sort of industrial input, so it's really hard to increase the demand for them. And so as a consequence of these two factors combined, the price of agriculture will become extremely depressed. Now, you can notably get fabric, demand for fabric in the industrial sector, but as a general heuristic, the prices here will become extremely depressed. And the reason why is you cannot create manufactories that use a lot of the farming goods. You notice the few farming goods that we have, we're going to be able to increase the price on elastic and cloth, but not really on meat, not really on grain, not really on fruit, not on these types of ones. Also, we will to some extent on the luxury ones be able to increase the price, but this is going to be just as the SOL and this sort of stuff comes up. But very often, even though they're super efficient, you have this highly depressed price of goods. You notice fertilizer. We're going to come back to fertilizer later. But just kind of quickly talking about agriculture, these ones very efficient in terms of how much net value they're adding to the market per construction. Very, very efficient, but they're not very efficient at contributing to the investment pool. And so we might see a change in 1.2. Just a heads up, it seems to be the case that they are changing the ownership, or changing your ability to change the ownership, at which point agriculture is going to get way, 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 way better. And I just think that this is worth mentioning, because this won't be 0.1 and 0.16 anymore. This will be a much bigger number. But until that happens, you generally want to kind of shy away from agricultural stuff until someone who has a better contribution efficiency can own them. Okay, now we're going to talk about the industrial goods. And you notice the first thing to notice here is the efficiency is way lower. The inputs and the outputs are huge. But remember, we have to think of it in terms of construction. You'll notice a lot of these are actually, they underperform kind of, to some extent, in terms of their construction efficiency. How much net value they have, relative to their construction. But it's important to recognize that these are going to drive the profitability of both your agriculture and your resources. For agriculture, it's going to drive your profitability of, all of these. Important to note, with cotton plantations, you do have a 25% throughput juice on these from cotton gin, and on your chops with the hardwood production, you have a 25% juice with pneumatic tools, which actually makes this PM efficient. It's not base efficient. But just coming into the industrial stuff, this is going to generally kind of outperform agriculture in terms of contribution to the investment pool efficiency, but not a tremendous amount, but it's outperforming agriculture while driving demand for resources, which are going to really outperform agriculture in terms of contribution to the investment pool per construction. And so it's when you're using the agriculture, this is not driving demand, right, for the resources, which are the really efficient thing. And so this is just something to keep in mind. But the industrial goods themselves are not actually contributing, maximally these huge amounts. But it will also be easier to get maximum throughput bonus on industrial buildings, which is not figured into like any of this sort of thing. And this is also worth considering for the industrial buildings because, for example, you will never have a level 51 chop. And so while this number might be bigger than a lot of the other ones, on a per building basis, you're generally going to have a throughput of 50 to 70% late game, which is going to effectively modify this value here So if we have if we have a throughput bonus of, let's say, 50%, and the chop's only 20%, or it's a little bit less than 20%, then we can think of this building as only taking 12 times to make, and then it becomes better than the chop. So this is just kind of an important thing for considering. It's much easier to get full throughput bonus on this than it is on resources, and on agriculture to some extent. On the agriculture, you can really push the throughput. But you'll notice they generally have a much lower efficiency, which means they're going to stimulate the rest of the economy more as well, and so they're importantly driving the resource industries. I think previously, before doing this entire experiment, I thought the resource industries fueled the industrial industries, and now, after looking at this value here, I kind of think of it as the industrial industries fuel the resource industries. They fuel the demand for all this, and so, yeah. And it'll be roughly the same as well for these. And so let's talk about chemical plants briefly, because I think it's worth talking about the chemical plants. So the chemical plants are notable because they have the absolute biggest total output out of anything. And you'll notice they have, let's jump into the game to talk about it. To talk about chem plants here. So if we find a chemical plant, we will notice that their output is absolutely insane. Let's look at Piedmont's chemical plant. Let's scroll over to Piedmont so we don't lose our minds. And we'll notice the inputs are huge and the outputs are huge in terms of the cost of the goods. And this is a defining characteristic of the chemical plants. It is overall most stimulating the economy. However, you'll notice something. That is this highly depressed fertilizer price. And so even though chemical plants look like they should just absolutely be just crushing it, what will happen is in almost every game, fertilizer prices get extremely depressed. And so chemical plants do not have this insane performance, even though they are, helping drive demand for sulfur, iron, and coal. And so, okay, well, why is this kind of important, or why is this good for, looking at? You can export fertilizer, yes, and this will increase the profitability. It'll increase the demand for these as you build more chem plants, and will decrease the price of explosives that get used in the chemical plants. If you are going to do any single trade good, exporting fertilizer is hands down the best thing you can do. Barring solving, not actually having access to a good. I don't mean to imply that. But overall, the prices will get very, very depressed of fertilizer as the game goes on, which notably encourages the building of more farms, which further depresses all the farm prices. And so this is kind of just how things go in terms of the goods. You generally will get really depressed farm prices. Specifically grain is what I'm talking about here. Which is fine for your SOL, by the way. Having low grain prices is great on that front, but it'll make it so that anything that produces grain is not especially profitable as the game goes on. So if you build a ton of grain early, you're gonna have problems later. But I think that the chemical plant perfectly captures that, despite on paper, when you're looking at the numbers in the abstract on the chemical plant, they're not very, very good, in practice, because this price always gets depressed. Let's jump back into our spreadsheet, and we'll talk about, I suppose we could scroll to the side and talk about our spreadsheet a little bit on this front. But if we just take a look at, we're going to scroll to the side and we're going to look at outputs. So chemical plants are outputting 100 explosives with brine electrolysis. This is 5,000 of the value. And where are they? For the fertilizer. Okay, and also when you're on nitrogen fixation process or improved fertilizer, it's going to be outputting 140 fertilizer. But this fertilizer is importantly, it's got a base value of 30. When it's minus 50%, it's going to have a base value of 15. And so it would be the equivalent, if we come over here, or sorry, it's producing 200 fertilizer and 100 explosives. It would be the equivalent of only producing 100 fertilizer, which is actually going to make nitrogen fixation process negative. And so whenever you're evaluating it, you just kind of need to keep in mind that if something's really efficient in the output or in the abstract, it's not necessarily going to be in practice really, really efficient. And let's talk about the most efficient stuff, and then we'll talk about the strategy. So the absolute most efficient building in terms of net divided by construction, that's net value provided per construction is in the agriculture tab, and it is opium with the automatic irrigation. And secondly, the most efficient in terms of construction efficiency per contribution to the investment pool when you're on publicly traded is actually going to be sulfur with 67.1. It's notably tied with the gold mines, but the gold mines is like a weird aberration because it's providing directly to minting, and it's the value of gold as a price, as a good, is 100, but this doesn't properly capture what's going on with gold. It's sulfur. And so sulfur is going to be the absolute best to build, but unfortunately, as you saw in the game, sulfur often gets depressed in price. And so, okay, well, how does this inform our strategy, or how should we think about things? If you want to have as many buildings as possible that are contributing as much to the investment pool per construction as possible. Allow me to repeat that because I think it should not get lost in translation. You want to have the highest proportion possible of buildings that contribute the most possible to the investment pool per construction. What's that going to mean in terms of practice? Well, first of all, talking about sulfur, you're going to want to produce sulfur and then export it. But it's important to recognize that most sulfur mines don't go up to 51, right? And so the output, you're never going to have the max throughput per building. And so exporting sulfur is good, yes. But where it's going to start, where you're going to really like shine, is you're going to shine in the resource industries that you can build up to level 51. So we're talking about, you know, diesel pump or condensing engine pump, on the iron mines, the lead mines, the coal mines that could all build to level 51. This is the practice, your bread and butter. You're going to want to go for these. These are the most efficient overall, or some of the most efficient. But also, the really, really efficient is going to be the consumer goods or the industrial goods. Notably, steel mills has some of the biggest, it's not the most efficient in terms of contribution because the net's not huge, but it does drive a huge amount of demand for the resources, which will increase the price of those. But also, just thinking about steel in the abstract, you can build all these to level 51, you can maximize the throughput bonus, and so despite the resources outperforming, the resources are only going to really outperform if you can maximize the throughput on them. You get the 50% throughput. And usually it'll be 50% throughput, plus perhaps a little bit extra throughput if they have a unique bonus. But for these, you will often get 70% throughput and sometimes 90% throughput. And so for all of the industrial or for all the manufacturers. And so if we think about it in terms of, okay, you're going to get 20%, you're going to have 1.2 buildings, you know, for the resources here. So for the diesel pump, it's, let's say our lead mine's going to get to level 20. And so this is going to be effectively 20% extra. So the output will be 2,400. We'll see that this comes up to 43, yes? So then if we come on over, which by the way, 43 is a really good value. Or the lower one when you're also on dynamite, it's 48. This is a really good value, even with the level 20 mine. But if we come over here, and we take a look at elastics, which is at 2100, and we say that it gets a 90% bonus because we're talking about encouraging manufacturing in the place because we can build infinitely tall, and we're talking about also getting the trade unionist bonus. Let's actually just kind of go in game for a second and talk about these things. So here in the capital, we're encouraging manufacturing, and so if we take a look here at the throughput, it's at 70%. We have a malus from orderly protests, but okay. We also have a bonus from trade unions. Late game, you will try and get the trade unions over 20% clout, at which point they will give 20% manufacturing industries throughput. And it's important to recognize that this is effectively giving you more of a building per construction before you factor in the fact that it's giving you cheaper labor, which we are not factoring in at all. But it is an important factor, but it just can't be captured succinctly in here. So if we have a 90% throughput, 20% from the trade unions, 20% from encouraging manufacturing, which to be fair won't be necessarily common, and then an additional 50% from economies of scale, this will go up to around 3,000. And if we see that at 3,000, we'll see that it contributes a lot more to the investment pool. And so what the strategy is going to be, it's going to be to find, oops, nope, that's not what we want. We want the other way around. We want to fix our problem. And so what the strategy is going to be when you know something is extremely efficient, you want to export the goods it produces to encourage your own stuff for building it. You know, this is going to be stuff like, specifically the textile mills and furniture are very good. In the industrial goods, you know, the shipyards are extremely good. The chem plants, despite having some problems, are extremely good. Although the problems, so you definitely want to export fertilizer, so there's that. Glassworks are also extremely efficient. For agriculture, you do not want to export these things. Generally speaking, the rice farms are extremely efficient, but if you're on rice farms, you're probably going to cause unemployment if you lean in and build a lot of this stuff. In general, you'll just want to import it, despite it being extremely efficient. You could maybe export opium, though, which will be really efficient despite only getting this 0.16 modifier, because it's like... the overall efficiency here, you know, the net is just so enormous. But okay. And then for resource industries, you want to think of your industrial goods as fueling them, as them generally kind of being more profitable in terms of their base. But if you're not getting them to 51, they won't quite beat out these. And these are going to contribute quite a lot. Especially in the early game, they're going to be particularly better because you can't really abuse the economies of scale quite as much late game. And so what the strategy might be, and I think that early game I've advocated going for tools before, super early, but I think what the strategy might be is like exporting iron and going for iron, especially in the early game, and then transitioning away from that as the game goes on, because it will become harder for you to have an extremely large bonus. You know, the chops look particularly good, but they are, you can never get a level 51 chop. And the most efficient ones here are the sulfur mines, followed by the rubber plantations, which also have a really big this thing going on, but they are unfortunately landowner owned. Notably, if you get this up to, let's say, if you get this to the better value, so let's see, if we get it to 0.16666, I think it is, it'll actually look much better. So exporting rubber is fine. This is, by the way, when you would be on what is publicly traded, because you would have this be partially owned by capitalists. But I hope that this has been informative. You know, it's quite a lot to take in. There's a lot going on, a lot of moving pieces, and it's kind of just, I think, we're going to be doing short ones on just kind of all the individual stuff, but I think that it's worth talking about and understanding in an abstract. Let's just quickly run down, I think, kind of maybe one of the most important, well, let's quickly go through it. When you're evaluating buildings or you're evaluating an efficiency, you have to look at the net value of the goods put in minus, the goods put out minus the goods put in. What you really care about is the net, and then you care about the net modified by the construction. And so if a building takes 24 ticks to build, it's going to be, you know, necessarily less efficient than if it were to have taken 8 ticks to build. And so this is important to keep in mind. You can't just compare buildings straight across. You have to compare relative to the construction, and then you also have to compare relative to their ability to contribute to the investment pool, which of course is going to be a decreasing effect, or it's going to be of decreasing importance, because the investment pool contribution goes down as you get a larger and larger GDP. And so arable goods like that are more owned by the aristocrats are going to become better as the game goes on as a result of the diminishing returns on this. This is just important for evaluating it. In general, the industry stuff will be the most the resource industries will be the most profitable in general, but you will struggle a little bit by not being able to bring them up to as high a throughput bonus. So extremely early game, the resources will be the best. Then as the game kind of proceeds and you eventually get to getting the trade unionist bonus, and you're encouraging manufacturing in some places maybe, it's going to be hard to chase a bonus unless you have a sort of bonus that is coming from something else. I don't know where we're getting mining production from. That's, I don't know where I think that bonus is from an event. I don't think it applies to everything. Let's take a quick pause and try and track that down. So that was a country-wide modifier. That was modifying all of ours in our Italy run. We loaded our Japan run, and we see that we have the throughput that's much lower. So it'll be much harder to chase a larger throughput bonus from economies of scale on the resource industries, and so the resource industries will fall off in particular. But you can think of your manufacturing, at least in the early to mid game, as fueling your resource industries, and then there to be sort of a reverse or some tension. You can chase really large economies of scale bonuses in agricultural areas, or at least 50% pretty consistently in a lot of places, but not all that much. But since you don't want to actively build, it's a little bit harder to encourage these sorts of things. And so this is just kind of something to keep in mind or to be aware of, that agriculture can often get to 50%, whereas logging will never get to 50%. As far as I know, there's no logging place that has 51 allowance. There's like some with 20 or 30 over there. This sort of thing. Let's see, we talked about logging camps and chemical plants in particular. I think the logging camps is a good example to talk about, because it does have the hardwood, which has the same price of the good, or the same overall price per the output for both softwood and hardwood. But since hardwood is almost always more expensive than softwood, with the exception of the early game, it will be more profitable to build over. And so you can't just evaluate all of these PMs in a vacuum. You have to evaluate them relative to what normally goes on. And speaking of, just briefly, what's going on with the arable land stuff in general, or the arable, the farm goods, is that these prices will become depressed as the game goes on. So even though they're quite efficient, they don't really contribute as much as they look like they ought to, especially because you cannot push up the demand for a lot of these goods very efficiently by creating more industry in the same way you can push up demand for resources by creating more industry. Notable exceptions to the agriculture, and these are just slight exceptions because the later PMs don't really drive up the amount of fabric, dyes, and silk that are used, but these fabric, dyes, and silk can all be increased. We also talked about the very best PMs, or the most efficient PMs, which was sulfur in terms of its contribution to the investment pool. Sulfur is best. And then just in terms of, raw net output per construction, opium is best. And then we scrolled past sulfur. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Do the YouTube algorithm stuff. I think we are going to be making videos focusing on each individual industry type, in regards to this whole nastiness. Oh wait, what happened to our... Oh, we closed the tab. Anyways, in regards to our handy dandy spreadsheet. Anyways, have a good one.